Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the G7 Fringe from, well, almost sunny Newquay down in Howarth. So we are coming live from CSpace, which is a really exciting new space for cooking, company development, innovation, activism here in Newquay, which is a partnership between ourselves at Real Ideas and Crowdfunder. So I'm Lindsay, I'm the Chief Executive at Real Ideas, and I have a fantastic pack for you today, and also a really special film that is coming from the World Wildlife Fund. So without further ado, I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves. We're then watching the film, and then we'll come back for a Q&A. So do, as you know, everyone out there, if you've got questions that you think of as you're watching the film, then do, put them into the chat, and we will feed them through and be able to ask those questions of our panelists afterwards. Okay, so Bevis, start off by introducing yourself, please.
Yes, thanks, Lindsay, and hello, everyone. I'm Bevis Watts. I'm Chief Executive of Triodos Bank in the UK, and Triodos is a pioneer of sustainable finance. We operate in 5 European countries with a banking operation that only finances projects that can demonstrate positive environmental, social and cultural impact, and we operate globally through an investment management business that engages in microfinance, but also scrutinising and holding large companies to account on their own environmental and social performance.
Fantastic, thanks Bevis. Alistair, so introduce yourself please.
Yeah, thanks Lindsay. Yeah, so I'm Alistair Macpherson. I'm the Chief Executive for Plymouth Energy Community, and I guess I'm a recipient of sustainable finance. So we're a charity and a social enterprise, and with a mission around empowering our community to create a fair and affordable zero carbon energy system. That's why we exist, and as part of that role, I've been involved in raising £6 or £7 million worth of investment to go into renewable energy projects in Plymouth. And I'm currently involved in other raises, finance raises for more renewable energy projects and a zero carbon housing project.
Fantastic, thanks Alistair, and I know it's been transformational for some communities. And last but definitely not least, Rhiannon.
Hi, I'm Rhiannon. I'm the business lead for the Our Planet project at WWF-UK. I wanted to say thank you very much first of all, for showing this film. And basically just a little bit of background about why WWF is talking about finance. We're very much known for kind of animal adoptions and that kind of thing. A lot of people kind of question what we're doing working on finance. But we have a big team of people working in sustainable finance, kind of reformed bankers who kind of come into stuff to try and help tackle the systemic drivers of biodiversity loss and climate change. And we realized early on as an organization, we're not going to save the world one species at a time. What we really need to do is tackle these big systemic issues. So we created the Our Planet project in 2019. It was 4 years in the making with Netflix. And we really wanted that series to be a seminal series that you could watch at any time, wherever you are in the world, because this is such a big global issue. We know that as adults, a year 4 or year 7 science class is a really, really long time away. So in order for the world to protect the natural world, and you have to understand how it works. And so that's why we created the Our Planet series, which is an 8-part series you can still see on Netflix. And then from that, when we were publicizing the actual series launch at Davos, we had business leaders come to us and say, this is fantastic, this is amazing. How can we take this conversation into the businesses where we work? We know that nature is so fundamentally important, but they weren't able to have those conversations with the business themselves, with their employees and with their staff and with their bosses. We also had other businesses kind of come to us and say, oh, it's very sad that orangutans are dying, but we're not a financial services company, so we don't have palm oil, so really this has got nothing to do with us. So we realized there was a fundamental breakdown in the communication, that people in business were not reading the same reports that we are reading, that we're putting out. So we took all the kind of information from these, I guess business people would say, data reports, and put them into something that they could engage with in a 1-hour kind of lunch and learn session. And that's where our first film, Our Planet, Our Business, came in 2019. That one was a runaway success. We've screened it, I think, 350 times in individual organizations. And then from that, the sustainable finance team decided we really should do the same thing, but through finance, because finance is such a systemic driver of the destruction that we're facing. And also finance is part of the solution. We'll talk about why later on, but it's really important that finance, the whole finance sector, gets on board to start funding the good rather than the bad. So we hope you enjoy the film. We'd also like to ask for the audience's help. If you know people in finance, please share this film with them so they can start having those discussions within their own companies. It's not going to change unless the employees, as well as the CEOs, kind of take this seriously. And then also start asking the pension companies that you invest into, and your banks and all the different insurance products that you do, ask them what they're doing on this agenda. Because again, if customer demand is not there for sustainability, they can easily ignore it. So with that, yeah, hope you enjoy the film, and we'll be around later for questions.
Brilliant. Well, wasn't that an amazing film? I really loved it, and I mean, just beautiful imagery as well as obviously the content of the film. And I guess if I could start with you, Rhiannon, could you sort of tell us something about I guess why the focus on finance now? You know, what is it about the point of time that we're at right now that means that this is the moment to really start talking about that aspect of environmental change?
Yeah, well, I think, can you guys hear me okay?
I can. Everyone else?
Great. I think one of the reasons why, four reasons really we focus on finance. One is because we really need them to stop funding the damage. I think you heard. So actually investing in fossil fuels. It's actually gone up significantly since we filmed this in January last year. Now something like 2 trillion that the banks globally are putting into fossil fuels. But it's not just fossil fuels, it's also the implication of plastic, but also deforestation and industrial agriculture, which are really driving all of the catastrophic losses of biodiversity and fueling the problem that we have. And we basically, as David Attenborough says, we have this 10-year window, which is now 8 years before 2030, that we really have to act. And finance is the only sector that can really drive those investments at scale and direct the capital towards good. It's not going to take pocket change to fix the mess that we're in. So it's really crucial that finance puts the money towards this now. But also because finance is crucial to drive change in the real economy. Companies like Aviva, for example, like they're really pressuring the companies that are funding the damage, and basically they have this thing called engagement with teeth, where they're basically kind of giving the companies that they're working with notice unless they come up with transition plans and plans to meet the Paris Agreement. They're going to, vote with their feet. And I think that's why we wanted to do this film now, because this is the timing for this is absolutely crucial now.
And have you yet had any reception from, the big financial institutions? What have they said?
Yeah, well, there's lots of noise. There's lots of people signing up to net zero targets. Great. I think half of them have no idea how they're actually going to get there. But it's good that there's attention on this now. I think the problem now is getting people to stand by what they're committing to and actually really understand the transition that has to happen. I think that's what we want to see next. And the kind of proof that a lot of people are talking about risk management. They're not talking about impact yet, and the impact that they have. I think it's slowly kind of trickling down now. People are starting to understand it a bit more, but it really needs to accelerate for sure.
Yeah, and obviously coming to you, Bevis, you're, Triodos. This is what you do. You've always been, at the sharp end, I think, of driving innovation around green finance. So I wonder if you could tell us a bit more about some of the ways that you're working in, at the moment, and I guess the trends you're seeing.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. I mean, to give people a flavour of what we do. I mean, we give people a commitment that we'll only use their money to finance things that can demonstrate positive impact. And if you do that, then you have to be completely transparent. So we publish every loan and investment that we make. And we think if others were to do that, that would have quite a big ripple effect, because ultimately one of the biggest market forces we have is silenced in people not being able to exercise the democratic right to know what their money's doing and choose what it does. But we try to influence the wider sector positively, and we in 2016 co-founded something called the Partnership for Carbon Accounting Financials, which tried to create a common methodology to say, well, actually, if we're serious about net zero, everybody's got to be using the same methodology and tools, or the targets you're setting and the monitoring against those targets are utterly meaningless. So that, I'm pleased to say, is becoming the global best practice standard, and we've even got 3 of the big 4 banks in the UK now using that methodology and so on. But that said, I entirely agree with Rhiannon. We've seen a lot of very positive commitments around net zero and other things, but then we've also seen similar things before. We've had for the last few years a lot of banks committing to the UN principles for responsible banking that we were responsible for founding as well, and then you see very, very little action against that. And the reality is, in every year since the Paris Accord was signed, the net total investment by the world's big 60 banks in fossil fuels has increased in every year by 2020, and then it only went down a fraction. It's still way higher than it was when the Paris Accord was signed in 2015. So I think we're seeing a lot of positive engagement and trends in the sector, and a lot of increased debate. But the real action is yet to come, and that's why this film is very important, and everybody really understanding and engaging that in systems change, money is really central to it.
Absolutely, and I think it's is what we've probably all long seen. If I could come to you, Alistair, obviously you're on the ground, really trying to, I guess, drive very practical change and finding the finance to do that. I wonder if you could sort of tell us something about both what you're doing and, I guess, are you finding things changing? Is it easier, more difficult to get hold of the finance that you need for the initiatives in Plymouth?
Yeah, I think things are changing massively, and I guess that's what gets me out of bed in the morning. You know, you cut my arm and you find a greenie in the middle. You know, I was listening to that kind of content, I guess, as part of my university degree, 30 years ago. So the kind of content that and the messaging and the content and the awareness of in the scientific community has been there for a while. What is changing very rapidly is what Kate Raworth talks particularly about, that kind of sandwich of moral pressure, at the top. And I think that gives me hope that stuff is changing. So the conversations I'm having are very different from the conversations that I was having like 8 years ago when we set up the Energy Community. And they reflect an appetite to do things different that I don't think was there before. We're kind of pushing against the kind of open door in relation to what we're trying to do more, rather than like being a campaigner. And what PEC does, Plymouth Energy Community, we're about like trying to give local people some ownership over their role, the part they can play in the climate transition. And that ownership can come in all sorts of forms of ways. People do all sorts of different things, but one of the things that we do is provide people with an opportunity to take a financial stake in the future of the zero carbon transition. So we provide people with an opportunity to invest in locally owned, locally controlled renewable energy projects, renewable energy businesses that effectively, support that local area's renewable transition. And provide returns back to that local area. So our nirvana is that we own and manage and maintain a big chunk of our city's renewable energy generation, and that we take surpluses from that social enterprise and we fund that to fund other areas of the fuel poverty transition, the climate and changes that we need to run through.
Cool, and I mean it's brilliant, and I can absolutely see how that's going. Do you? I guess, how far are you along that journey? Is this something where you easily get people to invest, or is this still something where maybe for the majority it's a bit of a foreign concept?
So the market for these kind of investments is really buoyant from where I'm seeing. So we've run local, what they call community share offers, which are a way for local people, for people of our community, to invest in renewable energy installations. We've raised £2.4 million through that over the course of the last 6 years or so, and that's all gone into delivering those kind of programs. There's been a bit of a pause because of the kind of challenges around bringing forward new renewable projects, because of the change in the subsidy environment for that. But the climate for investment in this still stays. So we are now seeing new projects coming forward. We've got a £7 million ground mount scheme that we're working on further at the moment, which we're confident we'll be able to raise the finance for, because that market is buoyant. If you speak to the providers, the crowdfunders and the ethical kind of investment providers, people like Ethics that we've worked with in the past, you're seeing like community social enterprises raising double what they go to raise, because there's enough people wanting to pledge their savings into these kind of projects. So there's a real market for people to want to do something different with their savings, particularly perhaps over the course of the last year, pushed by people not being able to spend it on other consumables. But I think yeah, there is an appetite there for it. What we could really do with is some wider support from government to regulate and to force this. It can't be just a market-led exercise that is pushed by the vanguards like this and Triodos. It can't be just campaign value-led organisations that want to do this stuff. There needs to be a stick to go alongside this sort of market incentives of carrots.
Absolutely, and I think it's a really interesting challenge. Before we carry on with the conversation, just to everyone out there, please do send in your questions. We're really interested in what you'd like to know, or indeed your comments, and I can feed them into the discussion. So I guess, moving on, Bevis, it sounds like there's the real difference between, I suppose, local energy, if you want to call it that, amongst communities, and maybe the sort of global drive. I find it slightly shocking that our big institutions, are continuing to actually invest more in fossil fuels when, obviously from what Alistair is telling us, there's a real appetite locally for something else. I guess, what's your sense of how we close that gap between the sort of local and the global? What else can we do?
Well, I mentioned earlier transparency is key. I think what Alistair described is if you cut them open, it wouldn't just be green, it would be dark green. That would be in the box of stuff that has huge social benefits as well as environmental benefits, and is the sort of stuff we love to do. But if we're going to have a sort of real sea change and for people to see it, we also need standards. The EU have done some great work on creating a taxonomy to try and define in the investment world what is green, what is seen as important transition sort of activities and technologies, and what should be sort of where should the red lines be set, and where should we really be discouraging further investment from. So that's a platform to then set product standards and give much greater transparency to that market force that I was talking about earlier. But it's not a simple question to answer, because we need huge awareness raising. We need regulators to move beyond thinking about climate risk to thinking about regulating to make banks socially useful and align them to the Sustainable Development Goals more broadly, not just align them to climate risk. But so there's a whole plethora of things that we need to be putting in place. And we can do this. We have to remember that our banking system and our larger financial system is man-made. It is not a given on this planet. So we have to sort of take a step back from that and think, well, what do we really need it to be for the next phase of our evolution?
So is your sort of sense that there's still a deal of greenwashing going on out there, that there's an awful lot of we'll say that we're much better than we really are?
There is. I should say that there are some very well-intentioned people in banking, people doing very good and serious things to try and grapple with these issues, as you saw in the film, and lots of very well-respected people getting hold of these issues. But we will live in a phase until those standards and that regulation that I mentioned comes into effect, where there will be greenwashing. And you're seeing it now, because I think some institutions are spending more on positioning themselves as green and towards net zero than they are on fundamentally changing. And you can actually visit websites of various banks in the UK, and you'll see they've launched a green saver. And they've launched a green saver to capitalise on the sort of trend that Alistair was talking about, the demand and the groundswell. But I would really challenge you to then go and say, well, what are the criteria for that? What are you actually financing? And you will either get nothing, it will click through to nothing, it won't even give you an option, or you'll find a very, very watered down environmental social policy statement. And in fact, there's a UK bank I was looking at the other week, and one of their big 3 environmental initiatives was a cycle to work scheme. So we have a long, long way to go still. And the UK particularly has to take global leadership on that. WWF recently produced a fascinating report that showed the UK banks, if they were a country, would be the 9th biggest polluter and generator of carbon emissions. So we have huge responsibility as a major global finance centre for what we're financing globally.
That's quite shocking, isn't it? You sort of, because I think probably as the general public, we'd all think, oh, things are definitely moving in the right direction. But frankly, it doesn't really quite sound like it is in truth. Rhiannon, is your experience from WWF that greenwashing is a major challenge that you're seeing too?
Well, yes, it is. I mean, there's as Bevis said, we've just released this report with Greenpeace called the Big Smoke Report. That again, there's a lot of banks who are very well intentioned, and not just banks, asset managers, all of them are very well intentioned, and they're setting these great ambitious goals. I mean, some of them are, but then they're financing stuff in their scope 3, which is kind of completely the opposite direction. So I'm not sure whether it's completely intentional or whether it's just kind of a loophole that people are not realizing. They haven't quite made the connect. Like, we've screened this film in different institutions, and their eco team is very proud. They've just done a big plastic initiative in their canteen. I'm like, but you're a big, massive bank. You have a much bigger impact than plastic. So a lot of these banks are kind of greening their, scope 1 and 2 is like they're changing energy, and they're kind of, cleaning up their office space, but they don't really realize the impact that their investments are having, this kind of finance emissions piece, which is, so we just need people to look at this holistically, really, and what they're spending their money on really is crucial, much more crucial than kind of the easy stuff to do, like light bulbs. And so, yeah, and also in greenwashing, I used to work in advertising. Like, there's a reason why advertising is regulated. And unfortunately, the claims that people are making now, they are kind of, a bit wishy-washy. Like, that, there's a reason why you cannot say things on pack that this is good, because it quite clearly is not. So there needs to be the same amount of regulation also with the claims that people are making as well, and like substantiated, like Bevis said, more transparency and holding people to account.
Absolutely, holding people to account. So in terms of government regulation, how far do you think this is something which obviously individual governments can do, but is this something really where the international community needs to act together?
Well, yes, because it's all very well if the UK cleans up its act, but the problem is then just going to be offshore to someone else. We saw that with coal. We've stopped coal production here in the UK, but then we're financing on a massive scale in like Southeast Asia. So if the UK cleans up its act, it's just going to go somewhere else unless there are regulations everywhere that everybody globally does the same thing at the same time.
Yeah, and I guess that's one of the big problems, isn't it? That we're still living in a, how you describe it, I guess, a sort of capitalist, post-capitalist economy where, shareholder value is, is paramount, and presumably that's what's driving some of this. So I'm sort of interested, Bevis, from a Triodos point of view, how do you manage to make things work where actually what you do is what you say you're doing, and not, as we're clearly hearing, something where, one half of the organisation is going in one direction and the other is completely the opposite?
Yeah, our ownership structure, much like Alistair was mentioning earlier, is absolutely crucial to what we do, because we're trying to balance sort of a sustainable and fair rate of financial return on shareholders in the bank, whilst also giving them a commitment about what we'll do with the money and total transparency around that. So governance is a real question here, and how we scale models that consider more than profit, or how do we perhaps regulate large corporates, perhaps requiring them to have set net zero targets in order to list on a stock market. So you will see a lot of that in the build up to COP26, because the London Stock Exchange have been lobbied to become the first in the world to do that sort of thing. So we have to redefine those boundaries and also enable greater shareholder action. You saw a colleague from Share Action in the film, and they do fantastic work, including trying to promote change in banks through share ownership, rogue share ownership, if you like, and promoting things there. So there's a lot of work to do around that whole governance and ownership piece as well. I'd just like to also say that the point on we can't act individually, absolutely, it's why we wanted to try and promote this common global methodology, because otherwise you've got banks all over the world reporting completely differently, using completely different methodologies and so on. But I think that's really important in the G7 context, because access to markets by financial institutions should become restricted if you aren't sort of following an agreed standard global methodology, and you aren't actually signed up to net zero commitments in a serious way.
And presumably, there are glimmers that might be happening. Obviously the reports that the G7 are going to act in relation to Amazon and the big tech giants, and how to think of a sort of global taxation. Are you sort of thinking that we might be, or ideally would be heading to sort of regulation which works in that sort of global way? We all agree to something in that way, or are you thinking that it's more individual, but everybody adds it together?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's the only way to go. I don't think we're going to solve this problem bilaterally. We need major global agreements. The interesting thing for me is the common corporate tax agreement, if we can get it. That gives a platform for a common carbon tax. And that's where you really start to see seismic shift. And I know that's what the Biden administration have sort of alluded to in creating that platform. But if that can be delivered, then you know, that does give a very interesting platform to tax corporates in a very different way and take into account planetary and social boundaries as well.
But, I mean, Alistair, I suppose I'm really interested in, yeah, brilliant. I mean, absolutely, that sort of global action, you can really see the benefit of it. But presumably, even if that happens, that doesn't negate the need for all of us as individuals to behave differently. I wonder what's your sort of take on, I guess, the relationship between local and global in all the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, we're all about trying to give people that opportunity to act locally. Because and stuff can happen in a world where, I think, you know, we've done PEC in a world where there hasn't really been any support for it at a national level. You know, it hasn't. You know, there's been no kind of government initiative to create organisations like us. So we are, I guess, an expression of local people's appetite to take hold of the issue locally. So. But yeah, people, be them in their homes individually, you know, on the breadline, or, you know, the upper middle class in their swanky mansions, or businesses need help with it. It is super complicated. You know, it's really, really complicated. You know, as I said, you know, it's not a single piece of regulation. There's a silver bullet that's going to see this. You know, there's multiple tiers that need to be, you know, the sort of leverage of the stick needs to come from various different angles on the finance sector and the corporate sector. But equally, at the grassroots level, we need to support people to myth bust, to get, you know, because at the moment it's just a big feeling, you know, be them in corporate entities that want to do something more, or households that want to do something more. But, you know, where does that feeling land? Do I do a heat pump? I don't know. Should I recycle more? I don't know. Do I become vegan? I don't know. Yeah, and the messages are really, really confusing. So, you know, I think WWF have done a great job here in terms of like distilling, and like, you know, there is a need to target, you know, people with very specific, audience-specific material that kind of breaks down this sustainability thing, which is a massive, an elephant way too big for anyone to eat, you know, into individual kind of stuff. So. Yeah, this is the finance sector, but if you're a household, this is where you can go for some support and some things. So I think, yeah, there's a massive role for local people and local institutions. We've actually seen, if you look at the UK's kind of carbon trajectory, you know, that has been fallen by centralised policy leaders largely. So, you know, we turned off coal, put on some nuclear kind of thing. We got some load of wind deployed and some solar deployed. And so our carbon emissions as a nation has fallen quite significantly through the implementation of those centralised kind of policy leaders. Not perfect, but actually pretty good. But what it's done is picked off all the things that didn't need individuals to change themselves very much. You know, it hasn't relied on individual behaviour change. That's the kind of low-hanging fruit done. The difficult work starts now, where you need people, local entities, individuals on board on the journey to make that journey. So even if the regulation comes along, there's still all those individuals. Everyone lives in a home, and every one of those homes, bar a few, is going to have a very significant retrofit in the next 10, 15 years. That is going to impact on everybody, you know. So, so yeah, there's a massive role for local in this global journey.
And then I guess, are you also seeing it in local government and local businesses? You know, is there a change of behaviour there, or is there still a little bit of an abdication that somebody else will sort it out? You know, either way, either big institutions or local people.
Yeah, I guess from where I'm sitting, I see massive appetite in local government, probably in a similar way that, you know, some of the big corporates that we talked about here. So making statements and commitments. There's lots of climate emergency declarations made across the UK. I don't know, I lost count how many local authorities have declared that they're all going to be net zero by 2030. And Plymouth's one of them. Those declarations, I think, are really important. You know, it's a statement. It's that first bit. We recognise. You know, we recognise. We don't fully understand what we're going to do about it, but we recognise and we're going to start. So they're on that journey. That's important. But it's equally important for them to be supported, resourced, given the levers to effectively implement that local place-based solution to that. At the moment, they're not. You know, they're trying to add that to their existing suite of responsibilities around adult social care, looking after vulnerable children, keeping the bins clean. You know, and you know, they've done that on the background of a kind of reduced kind of budget year on year. And then SMEs, local SMEs, they're the people I'm in contact with that are expressing that moral sandwich. You know, the kids are asking them what they're doing at their work about this space, and you know, and so that is driving, you know, lots of questions about what could we do. But again, they haven't got a simple targeted, you know, kind of piece of message that this is what you could do. And it really needs, businesses need that support to say, right, this is where your footprint is right now. Yeah, you've got your scope 1 emissions, scope 2 emissions, scope 3 emissions. This is your elephant. We can cut it down in these ways. But that support network isn't there at the moment.
Yeah, and I think it is, as you say, massively complicated, and there's no one route. It's a question come in from our audience who are interested in whether all of you think what impact that COVID might have had. Has it negatively impacted company and government interest in creating a sustainable future? I don't know, maybe if I could come to you to begin that, Bevis. What impact has COVID had?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all think naturally COVID's had a huge impact on global emissions and so on. And it did briefly short term, but if you actually look at 2020 as a whole, the impact of reducing carbon emissions and so on was negligible. And ultimately, it's made the problem a greater challenge, because we're going to have people working in a much more diffuse environment, which means heating more buildings and so on, instead of single offices during the day and so on. And I do think people are waking up to that, and COVID has created an opportunity around the whole Build Back Better mantra for people awakening that we need to live in a different way. And so I'm optimistic about it's created. I think if you, there is a piece of research, I can't remember who's produced it, that looked at which different states have really invested so far and spent on Build Back Better. And the UK doesn't fare well in that comparison. We spent a lot of money at the minute propping up the existing paradigm. So there's a lot more to do here.
And is you, I mean, on that, I mean, depressing that the UK is not doing well. Who is doing well? What sort of things are they doing that you would sort of applaud and want to share?
Yeah, I mean, perhaps not surprisingly, if you look at some of the Scandinavian countries, they've really seized this and taken this as an opportunity to think, how do we have a low carbon and more inclusive society, and are investing in infrastructure to create jobs and to create investment opportunities off the back of the pandemic that will deliver those sorts of things. So they've really quite gone into big procurement investment initiatives off the back of this.
And Alistair, on a more local level, do you think COVID has had a negative impact on people's, I suppose, individuals' commitment to this agenda?
Yeah, probably similar narrative to Bevis there, in that there was the short-term blip of manufacturing being turned off across the world. Nobody driving anywhere, everyone walking out the door and being able to smell the air being cleaner and stuff like that. But I think structurally we haven't seen substantive change in this space to give us kind of confidence that the lessons that have been learned about doing something different. I think the rose-tinted lens I put on that situation is I think there is a realization within the electorate that another universe is completely possible. That the status quo has been rocked beyond belief, kind of thing. And so some of that stuff, that skepticism at electoral level kind of thing about, oh, that's how it's always been. I think that's not the case. And a lot of people have, at an individual personal level, had time to reflect through the period of lockdown and think about how they would like to do things differently. So again, as individuals, their behaviour has already shifted, and they've understood that they can shift their behaviours. What they need now
is some kind of structural kind of support around that to mainstream it. Because there's quite a lot of commentary, I think, about like, yeah, so we've all changed massively, but actually if you continue as we are, we'll be back in that same situation in a very fairly short order, because we are largely creatures of habits, and our habits have changed a bit, but we really need, you know, the detox program supported en masse to make us kind of embed that change long term.
Yeah, and it's always yeah, slower than you might think, isn't it? We've had another really interesting question come in from the audience, who are asking, do the panel think that carbon pricing is enough to force change in state oil outfits like Rosneft, is that right, and Aramco, who appear to be immune from the court or shareholder impacts that are pressuring Shell, Exxon and Chevron? I don't know if I could start with you, Rhiannon. What's your sense? Is there enough pressure there, or are people just ignoring it? The big companies, Aramco and others, just ignoring the carbon pricing impact?
And I'm not really an expert in carbon pricing, so I'd direct this question rather to Bevis, I think.
Okay, well.
It also wouldn't be, but I will claim I'm an expert. I think if you look at carbon pricing at the minute, it's hugely varied. And in Canada, they've now taken measures to try and impose a minimum carbon price. And I think that's very important to get corporates to take it seriously, because a lot of people will say they already offset their emissions and so on, but at what price? And what does that really tangibly achieve if it's £9 per tonne or whatever? It's irrelevant. It's got to be north of kind of $100, $120 is where most people speculate. So that's why I talked about the global taxation earlier, then perhaps finding a benchmark for that. So I think that's very important. But this is where science-based targets become quite important. And I'm part of the project board for science-based target setting within Triodos. But if you look at that, it really seriously, it's an enormous challenge what net zero actually means. And it's not just going to be about a carbon price and kind of paying somebody to do it, because there just isn't enough land in the world to plant enough trees or enough peatland to restore. We're going to have to actually find a different economic model where we are managing our natural resources much better and creating the link. So we've been trying to pioneer some projects in that respect, where people can actually invest in the restoration of the natural environment, and that's paid back through those that are interested in the ecosystem services that come from it, not just carbon sequestration, but clean water, flood defences, the ecotourism benefits and everything else. So we absolutely need a much higher global carbon price and rigor behind how that's set and so on, but then we need to actually expand our minds and think it can't just be about offsetting. We've actually got to inset that responsibility to reduce and sequester.
Yeah, and it is tough, isn't it? Because I'm sure lots of us sort of think we've changed, we've swapped to green energy or whatever, and actually if you dig a little bit, sometimes you find you haven't particularly. So I think it's a really tricky thing. So obviously down the road in St Ives, not far away from where I'm sat, there are all the G7 leaders busily getting on with whatever they're getting on with. I wonder what you hope to see from this G7. So I wonder, maybe Rhiannon, if I could start with you. If you had a magic wand, what would the G7 do?
I think, as Bevis said, is to kind of take the money away from the kind of the dirty financing that they're currently. I think I just saw the Kate Rayworth and the 100 Economists basically publishing an article that said that the G7 have provided 86 billion in public finance for fossil fuels. 88% of that is in oil and gas, and that's 3 times their support that they put into fossil fuels than green energy, and that's since 2017. So our big message would be basically a just transition away from fossil fuels, and making sure that nature is also at the heart of all their climate plans. As Bevis said, it's not just about carbon, it's also about the nature loss that we're facing, and nature is a big carbon sink. So there's no point, deforesting the Amazon, putting that into our food products here in the UK and all over the world. It is kind of it doesn't add up. So we'd really like the G7 to look more into the nature aspect, while making sure that that's as strong as the climate commitment that we're hoping to.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, 2 very sort of clear asks. Alistair, if you could wave the magic wand, what would the G7 do?
I don't know really. to be honest, that global picture, I'm kind of more interested in the UK one, and that's not because I disagree with what was said previously, but I guess I'm hopeful that the conversations in G7 and then subsequently at COP in November really push the UK government to make some of the policy commitments that are required. We know there's stuff bubbling under that there's kind of, the politicos are kind of holding on to for the time being until the right moment to release it. I hope that the UK government takes that opportunity of leadership associated with COP26 to really make some substantive commitments in this space. And specifically, I think rather than the kind of technology by technology kind of piecemeal perspective, I'd like to see some commitments around place, around locality, and how locality can help with this journey. So supporting organisations at a grassroots level in a local area, local authorities with that transition. So yeah, so I guess that's my ask really.
Cool. So obviously a balance about what we're all doing at home as well as a group of international leaders. And Bevis, for you, where does the magic wand take you?
Well, I mean, the G7 countries and economies are the biggest procurers in the world. And so the world leaders sat around now are controlling access to those, the biggest global markets in the world. So they can be huge influencers of the supply chain. So I would like to see carbon emissions and biodiversity loss integrated into trade agreements. So if we are seeing deforestation to produce palm oil in Southeast Asia or intensive meat production in South America, trade agreements are actually requiring amongst those G7 countries for standards to be much, much higher, because it will have a huge ripple effect in what happens on the ground in countries that are primarily supplying into those G7 economies. And then beyond that, I mean, in the finance space, I mentioned earlier the issue about access to markets. Why should financial institutions have access to markets if they aren't complying with global best practice standards on A, carbon reduction targets and delivering against them, but B, being completely transparent in publishing the methodology and their progress against those targets. And I think those are the sorts of ambitions we need to be setting. So there are real warning shots across the bows of the biggest financial institutions that access to those markets will become a lot harder if you are not acting, and hopefully in a very short time frame. I think this isn't something we should be aspiring to in 10 years. This needs to be the next few years.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's definitely a sort of act now message in all of this. So I guess looking at it from the other side, for every single person, every single one of us who, sure, we can cast our vote from time to time, and I'm sure we all do, but what if we looked at it the other way? If there is one thing that you would like everyone in the world to do, right now, that would make significant change happen, what would be your thoughts of that? Maybe start with you, Rhiannon. What's the one thing we can all do?
Well, it's impossible to say one thing, as you know. But if I was to pick two things, if I may, one would be to be really conscious about the brands that you invest in terms of like whether you're buying your clothing or your furniture or your shopping. Make sure that those brands really are taking this seriously. I don't think you can necessarily do it on a product level, but on a brand level, that's really good. So be really conscious about where you're spending your money. But then also, so many people are passionate about nature in their private life, and there's lots of people kind of reducing their impact. So take that into your workplace, because you as a passionate individual speaking up within your workplace, telling the company that you work for that this is important to you, that will change things, because you know how to change your company quicker than any NGO can, kind of pointing from the outside. So whether you're changing like materials or, changing chemicals that you're using, or, just in charge of buying the paper or the toilet paper or whatever it is that you're doing, your marketing, like every single person within business can have a huge, massive impact. If you just take that passion into your workplace, I think that would accelerate change on a dramatic scale. Also, because employers want to know that you're interested. LinkedIn has said that there's been, I think, searches for sustainable jobs have gone up crazy numbers in the past few years, and employers are losing talent if they're not taking this seriously. So speaking up at work, I think, is massively important.
Absolutely, and I think we, as a social enterprise, we've certainly found that. We found that lots of people that we're recruiting, particularly, recently, and we say, well, sort of, why do you want to come and work for us? And, it's absolutely to do with values and alignment of values and mission and purpose. So, Alistair, the one thing we can all individually do, what would your choice be?
Yeah, we've got 10 years, haven't we? 10 years to make a difference, unless we believe we can do it, and in that belief have the confidence to express our values outwardly. That ain't gonna happen. So whether that's in the workplace, in the shop, in the school, you know, you've got to do that. Yeah. The alternative universe is possible, but it ain't against some time skepticism. So
absolutely, have confidence to live by your beliefs. And Bevis, from you, the one thing we could all do.
The one thing is to really take ownership of our money, and where we choose to spend, save and invest is a vote for the future that we want to live in. So I would really encourage people to think about taking active interest in where their bank is using their money, where their pension fund is using their money. So if you have a pension, then visit a campaign called Make My Money Matter, and you'll see which pension funds have made serious commitments to net zero. You can write to your bank and find out what they're doing with your money. And if they can't tell you, or if you don't like it and they're heavily invested in fossil fuels, then perhaps consider moving. And if you look at Ethical Consumer magazine online, they rate current account savings and investments. And you can also look at a website called switchit.money that will also give you advice and so on. So really take ownership of that responsibility that your money, there's no such thing as neutral money.
Absolutely. So there we all are. No excuse at all for us not all to act, immediately right now. A whole bunch of really interesting things that we could do. So that's it. We're sort of at the end of our session. Huge thank you to Bevis, Alistair, and Rhiannon. That was hugely informative. We have recorded this, so please do share this with your friends. Will all be available on the G7 Fringe website. And just to say, do join us for some other sessions. We've got a great session coming a bit later this afternoon, which is particularly looking at how people are choosing to work in different ways. And that's an international session between ourselves and Canada. Tonight, we're very fortunate to have Ali Tabrisi, who made Seaspiracy, with us here in Newquay, and we'll be streaming a Q&A with him later on this evening. Tomorrow, there's a People's Assembly. Do join us. Your views are really important, and on we go. So, if you're here in Newquay, come and see us. We'd love to see you. We're open. And if you're not, then please do join us online. And thank you very much indeed.